Welcome to Mystery Tales Unfolded. I'm your host, Eleanor Voss. Settle in with a cup of tea, dim the lights, and let me transport you to a world of intrigue and deduction. Today, we're diving into a brand new original mystery in the timeless style of Agatha Christie. Hercule Poirot and the Ancient Killer Unleashed. This is a long, relaxing tale. Perfect for unwinding. Over 90 minutes of narration if you're listening at a leisurely pace. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more cozy mysteries. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Is it a rainy evening in London? Or perhaps a quiet night in New York? I'd love to know. Chapter 1. The House That Remembered Everything. On the last Friday of October, those whispers grew louder than usual, because Blackthorn Manor was waking from a sleep of 20 years. The manor stood on a rise above the village of Lower Witchwood, its chimneys pricking a sky the colour of tarnished pewter. From the gates you could see the whole of it. 3 wings of soot-darkened stone, a clock tower frozen forever at 11 minutes past 3, and a single round window in the west gable that the locals called the Eye of Anubis, though no one could quite say why. Sir Reginald Hargrove had bought the house in 1905 with money he'd earned from gun cotton and a fortunate marriage. He had filled its rooms with whatever caught his fancy: Ming porcelain, Flemish tapestries, a stuffed Bengal tiger that still startled maids on the back stairs. But for 2 decades the tiger had gathered dust, the porcelain had stayed locked in cabinets, and the tapestries had watched the baronet grow old alone. Then, 6 months ago, Sir Reginald had sailed up the Nile with a party of scholars and returned with 17 crates sealed in pitch and wax. The largest crate, taller than a man and twice as heavy, had been carried straight to the locked study on the first floor. Village boys swore they heard it breathing. Tonight, the gates stood open for the first time since the old queen died. Carriages rolled in one by one, their lamps cutting tunnels through the fog. Inside each carriage sat someone who believed, quite reasonably, that Blackthorn Manor was about to change their life. First came Miss Amelia Hargrove, 25, flame-haired, and furious with the world for making her an orphan. She wore a travelling coat of bottle green velvet and carried a hat box that held not hats, but a stack of unpaid milliner's bills. Amelia was Sir Reginald's only living blood relative, and she had spent the train journey from London rehearsing 2 speeches, one of grateful affection, the other of icy demand. She had not yet decided which to deliver. Next, Dr. Elias Thorne, Egyptologist, Fellow of the Royal Society, and possessor of the driest cough in Christendom. He was 43, thin as a papyrus reed, and dressed in a suit the colour of Sahara sand. In his breast pocket rested a photograph of the statue of Anubis taken by moonlight on the night the tomb was opened. He had not shown the photograph to anyone. The less said about moonlight, the better. Lady Victoria Blackwood arrived in a silver Rolls-Royce that purred like a satisfied cat. At 52, she could still turn every head in a room, and she knew it. Her gown was midnight silk, shot with silver thread. At her throat flashed an emerald the size of a walnut. She had been Sir Reginald's mistress for 12 years, and his fiancée for precisely none of them. Tonight she intended to correct that oversight. Colonel Marcus Graves came last, descending from a battered Austin with the stiff dignity of a man who has buried 3 wives and 1 battalion. His moustache was magnificent, his boots polished to a mirror, and his pockets empty of everything except IOUs. He owed Sir Reginald £5,000, and had spent the drive composing a joke about interest accruing like the Nile in flood. He prayed it would land. Waiting on the front steps, umbrella furled despite the drizzle, stood Miss Lydia Finch, housekeeper for 23 years. She wore black bombazine and an expression that could curdle milk. In the village, they said Miss Finch knew where every skeleton in Blackthorn was buried, and had probably polished the bones herself. Sir Reginald greeted his guests in the great hall, beneath a chandelier so vast it seemed to float on candlelight. He had lost weight since Egypt. His evening clothes hung on him like a scarecrow's coat. Yet his eyes burned with the old fire. "My dear friends," he cried, spreading his arms so that the sleeves of his dinner jacket flapped like raven wings. "Welcome to the house that time forgot. Tonight we shall forget time altogether. Tonight we unveil the future." Servants glided forward with champagne flutes on silver trays. A string quartet hidden behind a Japanese screen began a languid waltz. Amelia accepted a glass but did not drink. Thorne sneezed into a silk handkerchief embroidered with tiny scarabs. Lady Victoria laughed too loudly. Colonel Graves drained his flute in one gulp and reached for another. Miss Finch stood to one side, counting the bubbles as though they were sins. At 9:30, Sir Reginald clapped for silence. The quartet ceased mid-bar. The candles themselves seemed to lean in. "Follow me," he said, and led them up the grand staircase. The study lay at the far end of the west corridor, behind a door bound in iron and fitted with 3 separate locks. Sir Reginald produced a ring of keys that clinked like bones. He unlocked the door, pushed it inward, and stepped aside. The room beyond was not large, but it felt vast because every inch of wall was covered in mirrors. Venetian glass, smoked and antique, reflecting the company into infinity. In the centre stood the thing they had come to see. The statue of Anubis rose 7 feet from a pedestal of black basalt. The jackal's muzzle was carved with such precision that the lips appeared ready to curl. Its eyes were yellow topaz, each pupil a sliver of obsidian that caught the candlelight and threw it back as green fire. One paw rested on a golden ankh, the other hung at its side, claws extended as though it had just finished strangling something small and warm. Amelia felt the hairs rise on her forearms. Thorne's cough dried in his throat. Lady Victoria crossed herself, an odd gesture for a woman who claimed to worship only Worth gowns. Colonel Graves muttered, "Steady, lads," to no one in particular. Miss Finch alone did not look at the statue. She looked at Sir Reginald, and her gaze was colder than the glass eyes of the god. Sir Reginald caressed the pedestal with proprietary pride. Excavated from the tomb of Meretanank, high priest of the 19th dynasty. The inscription on the base warns that any who remove Anubis from his sanctuary will awaken the ancient killer, a shadow that walks by night and leaves no footprint. He laughed, but the sound cracked like old ice. Superstitious nonsense, of course. Still, one respects the poetry of the past. Tomorrow the statue goes on loan to the British Museum. Tonight it belongs to us. He produced a small cedar box, opened it, and lifted out a dagger. The blade was bronze, green with verdigris, the hilt wrapped in faded linen. Hieroglyphs crawled along the metal like ants. "This," he said softly, "was found clenched in the priest's skeletal hand. I thought we might drink a toast with it, symbolically, of course." He poured ruby port into 6 crystal cups, then touched the dagger's tip to each rim. The bronze rang against the crystal with a note too high for human ears. Somewhere in the mirrors a dog howled, or perhaps it was only the wind. They drank, The port tasted of iron and pomegranates. At 11 o'clock, Sir Reginald declared himself fatigued. "An old man's privilege," he said, ushering them out. "Tomorrow we shall catalogue every artifact. Tonight, sleep well, and bar your doors if the fancy takes you." The iron-bound door closed. 3 locks clicked home. From the corridor, the guests heard the heavy bolt slide across on the inside. Sir Reginald's voice, muffled but cheerful. "Good night, my dears. Dream of pharaohs." Amelia lingered longest. She pressed her ear to the door and heard the scrape of a chair, the rustle of papers, then silence. When she turned away, Miss Finch was watching her with the patience of a spider. In the entrance hall, the great clock struck 11:30. Upstairs, bedroom doors opened and closed. A maid banked the fires. Outside, the fog thickened until the manor seemed to float alone in a sea of grey. At 11 minutes past midnight, the house was still. No footsteps stirred on the Turkey carpets. No candle flickered in the sconces. Only the statue of Anubis kept watch, its topaz eyes glowing faintly as though lit from within. And somewhere in the dark, something that had waited 3,000 years began to move. Chapter 2. The Scream That Had No Echo. The first scream belonged to Miss Finch. It tore through Blackthorn Manor at 23 minutes past 5, sharp enough to slice fog. It did not echo. The house swallowed it whole. Miss Finch stood outside the iron-bound study door in her grey flannel dressing gown, candle trembling in one fist, the other pressed to her mouth as though she could push the sound back down her throat. Behind her, bedroom doors flew open like startled birds. Amelia came first, barefoot, hair loose as fire. "What is it? Aunt Lydia, speak!" She never called Miss Finch aunt. The word slipped out in panic and lodged between them like a splinter. Dr. Thorne followed, spectacles askew, coughing into his sleeve. Lady Victoria drifted after, wrapped in peach satin and smelling of tuberose. Colonel Graves brought up the rear in scarlet pyjamas, revolver in hand, moustache bristling with outrage. The door stood exactly as Sir Reginald had left it. 3 locks fastened, heavy bolts shot home on the inside. Through the keyhole, they could see the brass key still in place, glinting like a tiny moon. "Sir Reginald!" Graves bellowed, shoulder to the oak. No answer. Only the soft tick of the mantel clock and the hiss of rain against the barred window. Amelia seized the handle and rattled it. "Uncle, open this instant!" Her voice cracked on the last word. Thorne knelt, squinting through the keyhole. "He's at the desk, head down. Oh God!" He recoiled so fast his spectacles clattered to the rug. Lady Victoria pushed past. One glance, and she folded like wet paper, a single moan escaping. "Reggie!" Graves did not waste time. "Stand back!" He fired twice into the lock. The report slammed along the corridor, deafening in the narrow space. Iron splintered, smoke curled. Graves kicked the door wide. The study smelled of candle smoke, port, and something sweeter, coppery, intimate. Sir Reginald Hargrove lay face down across his blotter, arms flung wide as though embracing the leather top. From the centre of his back protruded the bronze dagger he had used for last night's toast. The linen-wrapped hilt quivered with every beat of his heart, except there was no beat. The heart had already stopped. Blood had soaked the blotter, the cuffs of his dinner jacket, the scattered pages of an open journal. Across one page, in Sir Reginald's own impatient scrawl, 4 words crawled like dying insects. "The ancient killer comes." The statue of Anubis stood 3 paces away, unchanged, topaz eyes reflecting the corpse in 1,000 smoky mirrors. Not a fingerprint marred its basalt surface. Not a drop of blood had splashed its pedestal. Colonel Graves checked the pulse that wasn't there, then strode to the windows. Bars intact, latches locked, glass unbroken. The fireplace was cold, the chimney flue too narrow for a cat. He turned in a slow circle, revolver dangling. "Locked from the inside," he said, voice hollow. "Shot from the inside. Key on the inside. No weapon but the dagger in his back. How the devil—" Amelia's knees buckled. Thorn caught her, surprisingly strong for such a reed of a man. Lady Victoria began to laugh, high, hysterical, then bit her fist until blood beaded her lip. Miss Finch alone remained by the door. Her candle had burned low. Wax pooled on her knuckles, but she did not flinch. Her gaze moved from the body to the statue and back again, as though weighing which god had won. Footsteps thundered below. Footman roused, the butler shouting for the telephone. Outside, dawn was a bruised line on the horizon. Inside, the mirrors multiplied the scene until the room seemed full of dead men and jackal-headed watchers. Graves found his voice. "No one leaves this corridor. Finch, fetch brandy. Thorn, help me lay him, gently now." They eased Sir Reginald onto his back. His eyes were wide, pupils fixed on the ceiling. A thin line of blood had trickled from the corner of his mouth, but his expression held no pain, only astonishment, as though death had arrived in evening dress and tapped him on the shoulder at a party. On the desk lay the cedar box, lid open, velvet lining empty. The dagger's sheath. Beside it, a single sheet torn from the journal. "To whoever finds this, I disturbed what should sleep. If I die tonight, blame no living soul. The killer walks again, forgive me." Amelia read it aloud, voice trembling. When she reached the signature, she crumpled the page against her heart. Lady Victoria whispered, "He wrote it himself. Look at the ink, still wet." Thorn adjusted his spectacles, peering at the wound. "Entry angle is downward. Whoever drove it in stood behind him, tall or on tiptoe. Yet the bolt—" He gestured helplessly at the door. Graves examined the key. "No wax impression, no string, no duplicate that I can see." He looked suddenly old. Miss Finch returned with a decanter. Her hands shook only once as she poured. Brandy slopped over the rim of Amelia's glass, staining the carpet like fresh blood. Far away, a telephone bell jangled, London being summoned. The local constable would arrive within the hour, bewildered and outranked. By then, the news would have flown to Scotland Yard, and from Scotland Yard to a small flat in Farlington Mansions, where a neat Belgian gentleman was finishing his morning tisane. Hercule Poirot set down his cup, smoothed his moustache, and smiled at the messenger. "Tell them Poirot comes at once. A locked room, a dead archaeologist, and an Egyptian god who dislikes visitors. Mon Dieu, it is magnificent." Back at Blackthorn, the mirrors kept reflecting the impossible. A corpse, a dagger, a bolted door, and 6 living souls who had gone to bed innocent and woken to find murder had tiptoed through the keyhole. Chapter 3. Investigation begins. The London train hissed into Lower Wychwood at 21 minutes past. Whodunit. A single figure stepped down, small, immaculate, carrying a Malacca cane and a cardboard box tied with string. Hercule Poirot wore a charcoal overcoat buttoned to the throat and a grey felt hat tilted precisely 4 degrees. His moustache, freshly waxed, bristled with anticipation. Colonel Graves met him at the gate. "Damned glad you're here, sir. Local man's out of his depth, and the ladies are in hysterics." Poirot inclined his head. "Hysterics are useful, Colonel. They loosen tongues." They walked beneath dripping yews. Poirot listened while Graves recited the facts. Locked door, inside bolt, key on the inner side, Dagger in the back. Note, statue. When Graves finished, Poirot tapped the cane against his palm. Excellent! You have given me the skeleton. Now we clothe it with flesh. Inside the hall, the mirrors had been draped in black velvet. The house was in mourning for its reflections. The 5 survivors waited in the drawing room, arranged like pieces on a chessboard. Amelia sat by the fire, eyes swollen. Thorne stood at the window, coughing into a handkerchief. Lady Victoria reclined on a chaise, smelling salts at the ready. Miss Finch poured coffee with mechanical precision. Graves hovered, revolver still in his pocket. Poirot entered without ceremony. Bon matin. I am Hercule Poirot. You will speak when spoken to, and you will speak the truth. Truth is a shy creature. She hides in small corners. He placed the cardboard box on the table, untied the string, and lifted out a perfect replica of the study door, miniature, but every lock and bolt reproduced in brass. He set it upright. Regard. We begin with the impossible. He asked them, one by one, to describe the evening from dinner to bedtime. Each account was polite, polished, useless. Poirot listened, eyes half closed, fingers steepled. When they finished, he smiled. Parfait. Now we discard 90% and keep the crumbs. He requested the exact positions at 11 o'clock. Amelia, in bed reading. Thorne, writing letters in the library. Lady Victoria, taking a sleeping draught. Graves, smoking a final cigar on the terrace. Miss Finch, locking the silver pantry. Poirot produced a pocket watch. Colonel, you heard the bolt slide at 11:05? Distinctly, and the clock in the hall struck 11:30 before the house grew quiet. Graves nodded. Poirot turned to Miss Finch. You rose at 5, lit 1 candle, and went straight to the study. Yes, sir. Your candle burned for 20 minutes before you screamed. She hesitated. Perhaps 15. He made a note in a tiny green notebook. Time is a slippery eel. We shall pin its tail. He requested the dagger. Inspector Harrow, arrived from Lewis, red-faced and apologetic, produced it wrapped in oilskin. Poirot examined the blade beneath a magnifying lens. Bronze, 19th dynasty, ritual use, edge-honed recently. See the bright scratches. Blood has dried in the hieroglyphs. He sniffed. Almonds? No, merely imagination. He moved to the statue. Ran gloved fingers over the basalt, tapped the pedestal, peered into the hollow beneath. Curious, a cavity, but empty. He measured the distance from pedestal to desk. 7 feet, 2 inches. He measured the dagger 11 inches. He measured the wound, 8 inches deep, angled downward 6 degrees. Back in the drawing room, he lined them up like schoolchildren. Who among you can throw a knife? Graves raised a hand. India, 99. Could stick a card at 20 paces. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Excellent. Later, we experiment. He asked for personal items. Amelia surrendered a silk scarf. Thorne, a fountain pen. Lady Victoria, a pearl-headed hatpin. Graves, a cigar cutter. Miss Finch, a chatelaine of keys. Poirot arranged them on the table beside his miniature door. Objects remember what people forget. He requested the household clocks be brought. 6 clocks appeared. The hall grandfather, the study mantle, 2 bedroom alarms, the kitchen regulator, the stable yard timepiece. He wound each to the same second, then let them run. Within 10 minutes they disagreed by 4 minutes. He beamed. Time is not one voice, but a chorus. We listen for the false note. He dismissed them with a bow. Rest, mes amis. Tonight we reconstruct the crime. Colonel, the terrace at dusk. Bring cigars. Miss Finch, candles exactly as this morning. Dr. Thorne, your cough may be useful. He closed the book, stroked his moustache, and addressed the empty air. The impossible is merely the truth wearing a mask. Tonight, we attend the unmasking. Outside, the fog lifted just enough to reveal the round window in the west gable, the eye of Anubis, glinting like a watchful star. Inside, 5 suspects listened to their heartbeats and wondered which of them had already been judged. Chapter 4. Clues and Red Herrings. Dusk bled violet across the terrace. Colonel Graves had laid out a row of playing cards on the balustrade, 20 paces away. A footman held a lantern. The flame trembled in the wind like a guilty conscience. Poirot stood in the doorway, hands clasped behind his back, humming La Vie en Rose under his breath. "Colonel, if you please." Graves hefted the bronze dagger. He weighed it, frowned, then flicked his wrist. The blade spun once, twice, and buried itself in the Queen of Spades. The card split neatly. The dagger quivered. "Again," Poirot said. 3 more throws. 3 more queens destroyed. Each blade landed within an inch of the last. "Possible?" Poirot murmured. "But from 7 feet, in a mirror-lit room, with a man seated. The angle is downward. You would need to stand upon the desk." He tapped the replica door. Yet the bolt was shot after the throw. "Impossible!" Graves wiped his brow. Unless the bolt was shot first. By the victim himself? Why lock himself in with a murderer? Graves had no answer. Inside, Miss Finch had arranged 15 candles exactly as Dawn had found them. Poirot walked the corridor, counting heartbeats. 15 minutes from candle to scream. He knelt, studied the wax drips on the runner. One drip had a perfect bubble, air trapped beneath. He scraped it with a fingernail. The wax was warm. Someone had relit this candle tonight. He summoned the household to the study. The mirrors remained shrouded. The statue loomed like a black judge. Poirot placed a single candle on the desk, exactly where Sir Reginald's head had rested. "Regard! The killer entered after the bolt was shot. How?" He produced a length of black silk thread, looped it through the keyhole of his miniature door, and drew it taut. A gentle tug turned the key. A second tug slid the bolt. The door opened inward. Gasps rippled. Lady Victoria's fan snapped shut. Amelia's hand flew to her throat. "Child's play," Poirot said, "but the thread was removed. Where?" He shone a pocket torch along the wainscot. A hairline crack. He pressed. A panel swung inward, revealing a mouse hole no wider than a fist. The thread had been posted through, then retrieved with a bent pin. The pin lay on the carpet, glinting. "Elementary," he said, yet the murderer still had to leave. "Observe." He closed the panel, rebolted the door, then stepped behind the statue. A soft click. The pedestal rotated 30 degrees on hidden pivots, a narrow space, just enough for a slender person to stand inside. The statue revolved back. The bolt appeared untouched. Thorne's cough echoed like a gunshot. Clockwork! Springs and counterweights. Egyptian priests loved such toys. Sir Reginald demonstrated it last night. He thought it amusing. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The killer hid inside the pedestal, waited for Sir Reginald to lock himself in, stepped out, struck, returned, and let the mechanism close. When the bolt slid home again, the room was sealed, apparently empty. He produced the torn journal page. The note is genuine, written at 11:15, but the ink on the second line is different. See the darker hue? Added later, after death, to suggest suicide or curse. He held it to the candle. A faint watermark appeared, the crest of Blackthorn stationery, missing from Sir Reginald's desk. Stolen from the library. Amelia whispered, "Someone planned this for right, planned, rehearsed and left one mistake." Poirot lifted the chatelaine from Miss Finch's waist. 6 keys. He tried the third in the pedestal lock. It turned smoothly. Miss Finch went white to the lips. Poirot bowed. "Madame, you polished the statue yesterday. Your duster left fibres in the mechanism, scarlet wool. The laboratory in Lewis confirms the dye, identical to the scarf you wore at dinner." He opened his green notebook. 11:30. You were seen locking the pantry. 11:33. The stable clock strikes. 11:36. The hall. Clock. 4 minutes unaccounted. Enough to slip upstairs, hide, wait. Miss Finch's knees buckled. Colonel Graves caught her. She sagged against him, whispering, "He promised me the cottage, then changed his will." Her voice cracked like old ice. Poirot raised a hand. "Patience. We have the method. We lack the moment of courage. Tonight, we recreate it. Exactly." He looked at each face. "One of you will stand inside the statue. One of you will lock the door. One of you will die, on paper only." He smiled without warmth. "Volunteers?" Silence answered. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Inside, the candle on the desk guttered, throwing the jackal's shadow across 5 terrified faces. Chapter 5. Complications and Twists. The clock in the hall had just sighed 10:30 when Poirot ordered every lamp in the west wing extinguished. Only the study glowed. 15 candles again, their flames steady in the breathless air. The mirrors were unveiled. 100 Poirots watched 100 statues watch 100 corpses to be. "Positions, s'il vous plaît." He moved them like chess pieces. Colonel Graves at the door, revolver holstered but ready. Dr. Thorne beside the fireplace, notebook trembling. Lady Victoria on the chaise, pearls clutched like rosary beads. Amelia by the window, arms wrapped round herself as though cold. Miss Finch in the centre, wrists bound with silk cord, not tight, merely symbolic. Poirot himself took the desk chair. Sir Reginald's ghost. "Tonight," he said softly, "we live the murder backwards. The statue will open, the killer will step out, the dagger will fall, and the house will confess." He produced a small brass key, Miss Finch's duplicate, confiscated an hour earlier. He inserted it into the pedestal. A faint click. The jackal's torso rotated 30 degrees, revealing the hollow within. Black velvet lining, a single brass lever. "Miss Finch, you will pull the lever at my signal. The rest of you, observe, remember what you see." He nodded. Miss Finch's bound hands rose. Her fingers closed on the lever. She hesitated, sweat beaded her upper lip. Poirot's voice was gentle. "Pull, madame. Justice is heavier than bronze." She pulled. The pedestal revolved fully open. Inside stood nothing, only darkness and the faint scent of myrrh. Poirot's eyebrows ascended. "Curieux." He stepped forward, torch beams slicing the hollow. The velvet lining was torn. Beneath it, a second lever, smaller, painted black. He pressed it. A panel in the floor irised open like a camera shutter. A narrow iron ladder descended into blackness. Thorne gasped. "A priest's escape tunnel." "Exactly," Poirot said. "Built for tomb robbers 3,000 years ago, copied by an English baronet who loved secrets more than safety. The pedestal is a lift. One descends, walks beneath the corridor, emerges in the wine cellar. From cellar to garden. Door, 40 seconds. From garden to bedroom window, another 30. Total, 1 minute, 10 seconds, the perfect vanishing act." He climbed down 3 rungs, shone the torch. The tunnel was brick-lined, dry, barely shoulder wide. At the far end, a wooden hatch. He returned, dusting his gloves. "Miss Finch could not fit," he said, "nor Lady Victoria. Amelia, perhaps. Dr. Thorne? Easily. Colonel Graves? Never. Graves flushed crimson. See here? Poirot silenced him with a look. We test. He sent Thorne into the pedestal. The scholar folded himself like a praying mantis. Lever pulled, pedestal closed. 40 seconds later, the cellar door creaked. Thorne reappeared, hair full of cobwebs, eyes wide. Mon Dieu, he whispered, it works. Poirot turned to Amelia. Your turn, mademoiselle. She obeyed, trembling. She too vanished and returned, cheeks flushed with triumph or terror. Lady Victoria refused. I should ruin my stockings. Poirot bowed. Understood. He faced Miss Finch. You knew of the tunnel. She shook her head violently. Never. Sir Reginald showed me the revolving trick only. He laughed, said it was for parlour games. Poirot believed her. The shock in her eyes was too raw for theatre. He dismissed the court. She rubbed her wrists, staring at the open pedestal as though it had betrayed her. Then we have two killers, Poirot said. One who hid inside the statue and struck. One who waited below, received the dagger, and escaped through the tunnel. A duet, not a solo. He produced a folded sheet, Sir Reginald's true will, discovered inside a hollowed copy of Herodotus, dated 3 days ago. Amelia inherited the estate. Thorne received the artifacts, on condition he marry Amelia within the year. Lady Victoria, £10,000 and the emerald parure. Graves, debts cancelled. Miss Finch, the cottage and a pension. A codicil in different ink. Should any beneficiary cause my death, all bequests revert to the British Museum. Thorne went the colour of old parchment. Amelia's hand flew to her mouth. Victoria laughed, sharp, delighted. Graves swore under his breath. Poirot held up the dagger. Fibres on the hilt, green silk, from a waistcoat worn only by Dr. Thorne at dinner. He produced a torn scrap from Thorne's pocket. Match. Thorne backed toward the window. Coincidence? Non. You quarrelled with Sir Reginald at 10:45. Miss Finch overheard. You demanded the statues outright. He refused. You threatened to expose his smuggling of relics. He laughed, said the tunnel would protect him. You proved him wrong. Thorne lunged for the terrace door. Graves intercepted, pistol drawn. Thorne froze. Poirot continued, relentless. You hid in the pedestal at 11:02. Amelia, your secret fiancée, waited below. She passed you the dagger through the floor hatch. You struck. She fled via the tunnel, emerged in the rose garden, re-entered, through the servant's stair. By 11:36 she was in bed, cheeks flushed from running. You revolved out at 11:40, descended, and joined her. 2 hearts beating as one, against one corpse. Amelia began to cry, soundless. Thorne's shoulders sagged. Poirot's voice softened. You loved her. You feared losing everything. But murder, mes enfants, is a debt that compounds nightly. He signalled Graves. The colonel snapped handcuffs, borrowed from Inspector Harrow, around Thorne's wrists. Amelia sank to the carpet, sobbing into her skirts. Miss Finch crossed herself, whispering Latin. Lady Victoria examined her nails. Poirot closed the pedestal with a gentle push. The jackal's eyes dimmed, as though satisfied. Outside the fog lifted entirely. Moonlight silvered the terrace, revealing a single set of footprints leading from the rose garden to the house, small, neat, a woman's shoe. Tomorrow, Poirot said, Scotland Yard will measure depths and motives tonight. The house may sleep. He bowed to the shattered lovers. Love is a dangerous relic. Some tombs should remain sealed. The candles guttered one by one. In the mirrors, the reflections rearranged themselves. 5 living souls, 2 in custody, 1 god blinking slow approval. Chapter 6. Deepening the Mystery. The wine cellar smelled of cork rot and candle smoke. At 2 minutes past midnight, Poirot descended the iron ladder with the grace of a man stepping into a ballroom. Behind him came Inspector Harrow, notebook flapping like a wounded crow. Colonel Graves carried a storm lantern. Its beam jittered across racks of dusty bottles, and the single square of moonlight falling through the garden hatch. Amelia and Thorne waited below, wrists cuffed, faces pale as the moon. Amelia's tears had dried into salt tracks. Thorne's cough had vanished, as though fear had cured it. Miss Finch stood guard with a silver candlestick, her bombazine skirts brushing the brick floor like a raven's wing. Poirot knelt beside the hatch. A woman's shoe print, small, narrow heel, was pressed into the dust. Beside it, a deeper print, a man's brogue, thorns. He measured both with a tailor's tape. Perfect overlay, he murmured. They descended together, returned together. Love leaves a heavy footprint. He shone the lantern along the tunnel, 27 paces to the pedestal lift. Halfway, a scrap of green silk snagged on a nail. He tucked it into an envelope already labelled in his neat, slanted hand. "Dr. Thorne," he said, rising, "you will now speak the truth aloud. The cellar has excellent acoustics." Thorne's voice cracked like a schoolboy's. "We never meant murder, only to frighten him. Reginald kept a second will, one that disinherited Amelia entirely. He showed it to me at 10:40. Laughed, said the museum would have everything and we would have nothing. I lost my temper. Amelia heard us shouting. She slipped in through the garden, climbed the ladder, passed me the dagger. I only meant to nick his shoulder, make him sign the new will." He turned. The blade went deeper. He swallowed. I panicked, wiped the hilt on my waistcoat, dropped the note I'd forged earlier. Amelia pulled the lever. The pedestal closed. We ran. Amelia's whisper floated up. I thought the tunnel was legend. Uncle told bedtime stories about priest holes. I never imagined. She began to shiver. Thorne put a cuffed hand on her shoulder. Graves allowed it. Poirot produced the forged note. Written on blackthorn paper, yes, but the watermark is reversed. You photographed the stationery in the library, printed it backwards on a gelatin plate. Clever, almost. He turned to Miss Finch. You suspected? She nodded once. The pantry clock was slow. I heard 2 sets of feet on the back stair at 11:34. I said nothing. Sir Reginald had promised me the cottage for 30 years of service. I thought, perhaps he deserved a fright. Poirot's eyes softened a fraction. Silence is a heavy coin, madame. You spent it wisely. He addressed Harrow. Charges, Dr. Relias Thorne, murder. Miss Amelia Hargrove, accessory. Miss Finch, misprision of felony. The Colonel, none. He merely threw knives at playing cards. Graves exhaled like a punctured bellows. Poirot climbed 3 rungs, paused. One last curiosity. He reached into the pedestal lift and pressed the black lever. A soft grinding. The entire pedestal descended 2 inches, then stopped. A hidden drawer slid open at its base. Inside lay a single papyrus scroll, brittle as dead leaves. Thorne's eyes widened. The Marianunk death list. Reginald swore it was blank. Poirot unrolled it beneath the lantern. Ink, still black after 3 millennia, listed 7 names in hieratic script. The last 2 had been added in fountain pen blue. Elias Thorne, Amelia Hargrove beneath, in Greek. He who disturbs the guardian shall join the guarded. Poirot rolled it gently. Sir Reginald translated it himself. He believed the curse required a sacrifice every generation. He chose you too, then changed his mind. Too late. He handed the scroll to Harrow. Exhibit A. The British Museum will fight you for it. Upstairs, Dawn was a thin gold line under the curtains. The house exhaled. Somewhere a clock that had lied for years struck the correct hour for the first time. Poirot addressed the prisoners. "You sought to bury an old curse. Instead you woke it. Anubis does not kill. He merely watches while men do the work." He bowed to the statue as he passed. The topaz eyes caught the lantern and flung it back, green, amused, ancient. In the hall, Lady Victoria waited in travelling furs. She pressed a cheque into Poirot's hand. "For your fee, and for the emerald parure. Keep it. I suddenly find emeralds heavy." Poirot tucked the cheque away. "Generosity becomes you, madame." Colonel Graves offered a brandy. Poirot accepted a thimbleful. "To absent friends," Graves toasted. "And present fools," Poirot added. They drank. Miss Finch appeared with a small portmanteau. "The cottage is mine, after all. Sir Reginald's last joke." She almost smiled. Outside, the police van crunched on gravel. Amelia paused on the step. "Will they hang us?" Poirot considered. "Transportation, perhaps. Egypt needs archaeologists. You will dig honestly this time." Thorne managed a ghost of a grin. "Full circle." The van doors closed. The fog, which had held its breath for 6 hours, rolled in again, swallowing the manor whole. Poirot lit a tiny cigar, watched the smoke curl toward the round window. "The eye of Anubis closes," he said to no one, "until the next fool opens a tomb." He tipped his hat to the jackal, climbed into the waiting Daimler, and was gone before the clock struck 7. Behind him, Blackthorn Manor settled into its old silence, richer by one secret, poorer by 2 hearts, and exactly on time for the first time in a century. Chapter 7. Suspect interrogations intensified. 3 weeks later, on a morning so crisp the leaves rang like glass, a plain envelope arrived at Farlington Mansions. It was addressed in violet ink, the colour of bruised lilacs. Poirot slit it with a silver knife, unfolded a single sheet of blackthorn notepaper, and read, "My dear Monsieur Poirot, the cottage is mine, the clocks are truthful, and the mirrors have been sold to a circus in Brighton. Yet one debt remains. Come before the frost. Bring no escort. The eye wishes to thank you." L.F. Poirot folded the note, tucked it inside his breast pocket, and caught the 10:17 to Lower Witchwood. He carried only the Malacca cane and a small tin of tisane. The village had already forgotten the murder. Children chalked hopscotch grids over the police tire marks. At the manor gates, a single black ribbon fluttered, half torn away by wind. Poirot walked the gravel alone. Miss Finch waited on the cottage step, smaller than memory, wrapped in a shawl the colour of candle smoke. She did not speak, merely opened the door and led him through the scullery to a room he had never seen. A low-ceilinged parlour smelling of cedar and dried roses. On the table stood the statue of Anubis, reduced to 18 inches, eyes still topaz, but now set in painted plaster. "A replica," she said. "The museum took the original. They gave me this in exchange for silence about the tunnel. Silence is lighter than bronze." Poirot circled the little god. "And the eye." She drew aside a curtain. In the garden, the round west window had been removed from the manor and rebuilt into the cottage gable. Sunlight poured through it, striking the replica's eyes so they blazed green fire across the flagged floor. "Sir Reginald's last joke," she said. "He left instructions in the Herodotus margin. Let the eye watch the woman who kept my secrets." I obeyed. Poirot's gaze softened. "You kept more than secrets, madame. You kept your soul." She poured tea from a brown Betty pot. Steam curled between them like incense. "I have 3 things to give you," she said. "First, the truth about the clocks." She produced a cardboard box. Inside lay 6 brass clock weights, each wrapped in flannel. One weight was lighter by 2 ounces. Its cavity held a rolled slip of onion skin. "Sir Reginald's real confession," she said, "written the night he died, hidden before the forgery. He discovered Thorne's embezzlement in Egypt. He planned to expose him at breakfast. He never imagined Thorne would strike first." Poirot read the tiny script. "If I die by bronze, blame the jackal I stole. Forgive Amelia. She is innocent of all but love. Give Finch the cottage and the eye. She alone never coveted gold." R.H. Poirot slipped the confession into his pocket. Second, she opened a cedar box. Inside lay the emerald parure, returned by Lady Victoria with a note. "Too many ghosts in the settings." "I cannot wear them," Miss Finch said. "Sell them. Use the money for a scholarship. Girls who wish to study hieroglyphs. Call it the Hargrove Redemption." Poirot inclined his head. "Third?" She led him to the garden. Beneath the eye window, a square of earth had been freshly turned. A rose bush grew there, already budding blood red. "Amelia's last gift," Miss Finch said, "sent from Holloway, a cutting from the Manor's Night Herald rose. She asked that it mark the spot where love went wrong. It flowers in winter." Poirot knelt, touched a leaf. "Love, like roses, survives frost." Miss Finch's eyes glistened. "I was cruel to her once. I thought jealousy was loyalty. You taught me the difference." A bell rang in the cottage. Soft, true, no longer lying. She glanced at the clock. "The London train. You must not miss it." At the gate, she pressed a small object into his gloved hand. A wax seal, Anubis in profile, the twin of the one on Sir Reginald's desk. "For your collection," she said. "When you doubt the order of things, press it into warm wax. Remember, every tomb has 2 doors, one for entering, one for leaving." Poirot bowed low. "Madame, you have given me the rarest clue. Peace." He walked away beneath copper beeches. At the bend in the lane, he paused, looked back. Miss Finch stood framed by the eye, sunlight crowning her grey hair. She raised one hand, not a wave, but a blessing. The train carried him through meadows silvered with frost. In his compartment, he opened the green notebook for the last time. Case closed. Motive: greed masked as love. Method: pedestal, tunnel, forged note. Moral: the dead do not curse, the living do that for them. He underlined the final line twice, then closed the book and watched Sussex slide past the window like a dream remembered in daylight. That evening, in Farlington Mansions, he set the little wax seal beside his tisane cup. Across London, in a cottage garden, a rose opened its first winter petal, dark as forgiven blood. And somewhere, in the hush between heartbeats, the jackal god blinked once, slow, satisfied, and turned his face to the moon. Chapter 8. Another crime strikes. The letter arrived at dawn on All Saints' Day, sealed with black wax and the jackal's profile. Poirot recognized the hand before he broke the seal. He read it once, frowned, read it again, then telephoned the station for the first train south. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, the eye has opened again. Come quickly, bring the seal. Do not tell the police." LF. The cottage door stood ajar. A single candle guttered on the sill, its flame flattened by a draught that smelled of turned earth and iron. Poirot stepped inside. Miss Finch lay on the parlour rug, face turned toward the replica statue. A thin red line crossed her throat like a misplaced smile. The emerald parure glittered on the table, untouched. On the floorboards, written in her own blood with a trembling finger. The third name. Poirot knelt. Pulse none. Rigour just beginning. Time of death between 3 and 4 a.m. He lifted the little plaster anubis. Its base had been smashed. Inside lay a rolled scrap of papyrus, the missing fragment of the Merit-and-Ankh death list. 3 names now stood in violet ink: Elias Thorne, Amelia Hargrove, Lydia Finch beneath, in the same hand that had written the morning's letter. "The Guardian keeps his tally. Finish it, little Belgian, or the 4th will be you." Poirot's moustache bristled. He wrapped the fragment in silk, pocketed it, and began to search. The cottage had been ransacked with surgical care. Drawers opened, books fanned, yet nothing taken except the rose cuttings from Amelia's plant. Every petal lay scattered across the hearth like drops of frozen blood. Footprints in the soft garden soil led from the eye window to the rosebed and back. A woman's shoe, size 5, narrow heel, identical to Amelia's prints in the tunnel. But Amelia was in Holloway, and the soil was wet with last night's rain. The prints were fresh. Poirot followed them to the manor. The great house stood empty, windows blind. He let himself in with Miss Finch's chatelaine, still warm from her pocket. In the study, the pedestal lift yawned open. Someone had descended since dawn. He followed. The tunnel smelled of myrrh and fresh-turned brick. Halfway along, a new side passage had been broken through, an amateur job, plaster dust still drifting. It opened into the manor's old ice house, long disused. There, in a circle of candle stubs, sat Amelia Hargrove. She wore prison grey, hair shorn, eyes luminous with fever. At her feet lay a bronze dagger, twin to the one that killed Sir Reginald. Her wrists were raw from cuffs, but the cuffs were gone. "I escaped," she said simply, "walked out in a laundry basket. The list is real, Monsieur Poirot. Uncle woke something. It spoke to me in the dark, told me the order. Thorne, first, heart attack in his cell, they said. Finch second, me third. I thought if I finished the list, it would stop." Poirot studied her. "And the 4th name?" She lifted the dagger. "Yours. The Guardian demands balance." She lunged. Poirot sidestepped. The Malacca cane flicked up, caught her wrist. The dagger clattered across the ice. He pinned her gently, speaking in the voice he saved for frightened children. "Listen, ma petite. The list is ink, not fate. Your uncle forged the names to terrify rivals. Thorne died of digitalis, self-administered. Miss Finch opened her own throat because guilt is sharper than bronze. You are the last ghost." Amelia sagged. "I saw the eye blink. It followed me." Poirot produced the wax seal. He pressed it into a puddle of melted candle. The jackal's profile stared up. Calm. Regard. Wax cools. Ink dries. God's sleep. He helped her to her feet. Together they climbed into daylight. At the cottage, he brewed tisane on Miss Finch's spirit kettle. Amelia drank, hands trembling. Outside, the rosebush had burst into impossible bloom, dozen crimson flowers against November frost. "The Night Herald," she whispered. "It flowers for the dead." "Or for the living who choose life," Poirot corrected. He telephoned Inspector Harrow from the village post office. By noon, the laundry basket was traced, the side tunnel sealed, the dagger catalogued. Amelia was returned to custody, gently, with a promise of clemency for surrender. Before the London train, Poirot paused beneath the eye window. Sunlight struck the glass. For an instant the jackal seemed to nod. He raised the wax seal in salute. "Merci, old friend. Your tally is complete." On the ride north, he opened the green notebook to a fresh page. Postscript. The curse was paper. The killer was grief. The Guardian merely watched. He underlined the last line, closed the book, and watched frost feathers bloom on the window like tiny jackals made of ice. That night in Farlington Mansions, he placed the replica statue on his mantle. At midnight, the topaz eyes caught the street lamp and glowed, once softly, then dimmed forever. Somewhere south, a rose petal fell, red against white frost, and did not bleed. Chapter 9. The Revelation. The British Museum closed its Egyptian wing at 5. At 6 the lights dimmed to a single amber pool above the new display. Statue of Anubis, 19th dynasty, on loan from the Hargrove estate. A discreet brass plate read, "In memory of Sir Reginald Hargrove, who believed gods could be borrowed." Poirot arrived at 6:30, invited by the keeper of antiquities himself. He wore evening dress and carried a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. The keeper, a stooped man named Dr. Featherstone, greeted him with nervous delight. "Mr. Poirot, the statue has behaved oddly since arrival. Clocks stop, thermometers drop, even the night porter refuses the gallery." Poirot smiled. Objects remember their owners. Tonight we give this one a new memory. They walked the marble corridor. Their footsteps echoed like slow heartbeats. In the gallery, the jackal stood on a black plinth, topaz eyes catching the amber light and throwing it back green. Around its pedestal lay velvet ropes and a circle of fresh lilies, white, funereal, already wilting. Featherstone unlocked the ropes. Poirot stepped inside the circle. He unwrapped the parcel. The plaster replica, the wax seal, and a single crimson rose from Miss Finch's garden. He laid the rose at the statue's paws. He pressed the wax seal into a dish of molten candle wax beside the plinth. The jackal's profile cooled into perfect relief. "Regard," he told the empty air. "A god may be stone, but memory is wax. Tonight we set the memory." He produced a tiny silver hammer and tapped the statue's left paw, 3 times soft as a heartbeat. A hidden panel sighed open. Inside lay the original papyrus death list, returned anonymously that morning. The violet ink had bled. The 3 names were now blurred into one dark bruise. Featherstone gasped. "How did you know?" Poirot did not answer. He lifted the papyrus with tweezers, slid it into a glassine envelope, and sealed it with the jackal wax. Then he spoke, not to Featherstone, but to the statue. "You kept your tally, mon vieux. 3 names, 3 deaths, but the 4th was never written, see?" He turned the papyrus to the light. At the bottom, in Sir Reginald's hurried scrawl, a final line had appeared, faint, almost invisible until the wax seal warmed it. "The guardian's debt is paid in roses, not blood. Let the living bury the living." R.H. Featherstone's eyes filled. Chemical ink, invisible until heated. He planned this all along. "Exactement," Poirot said. "A message for the one who solved the riddle. A rose for every mourner. A seal for every secret." He closed the panel. The statue seemed to settle, shoulders relaxing into stone. Featherstone locked the ropes again. "Will it behave now?" Poirot considered. "It will dream. Dreams are quieter than curses." They walked out together. Behind them, the lilies straightened. Their petals flushed faint pink, as though kissed by unseen sunlight. At the museum steps, a taxi waited. Poirot paused. One last errand. He directed the driver to Holloway Prison. Visiting hours were long over, but the governor owed Poirot a favour from the case of the bishop's umbrella. Amelia Hargrove was brought to the interview room in a grey dressing gown, hair growing back in soft auburn curls. She looked up, startled. "Monsieur!" Poirot laid the sealed envelope on the table. "Your uncle's final bequest. Read it when you are free. It is short." She touched the wax jackal with one finger. "Will it forgive me?" "It already has," he said. "Forgiveness is a door that opens from the inside." He left her weeping quietly over the envelope. Back in Farlington Mansions, he brewed verbena tisane and opened the green notebook to the ultimate page. Epilogue to an epilogue. The statue sleeps. The list is glassine and wax. The rose blooms in winter. The fourth name was never needed. He drew a tiny jackal beside the words, closed the book, and set it on the shelf between the murders in the Rue Morgue and a pressed Night Herald petal. At midnight, the mantel clock, borrowed from Blackthorn and now truthful, struck 12 clear notes. Across London, in the museum, the great clock in the Egyptian wing chimed in perfect unison. For the first time in 30 years, every clock in the city agreed. Somewhere south, a cottage garden filled with impossible roses. Somewhere north, a woman in a prison cell smiled at a wax seal. Somewhere in the hush between heartbeats, a jackal god laid his muzzle on his paws and dreamed of moonlight on the Nile, 3,000 years away, and finally at peace. Poirot raised his cup to the dark. "À la vôtre, old guardian. Your watch is ended." He drank, set the cup down, and for the first time in a month slept without dreaming of tunnels, daggers, or topaz eyes. Outside, November frost painted the window pane with tiny jackals made of ice. By morning, they had melted into ordinary water, carrying the last curse gently down the pane and into the Thames, where curses go to drown. Chapter 10. Justice Served. The invitation arrived on the first day of spring. Heavy cream stock, black border, violet ink, no stamp, delivered by hand. Poirot turned it over twice before the scent of roses reached him. Monsieur Hercule Poirot is requested at the reopening of the Blackthorn Manor Saturday 21st March the sunset. Come alone, bring the seal. He almost refused. Then he saw the postscript, written in a child's careful round hand. "Please, sir, the roses want to say thank you. A.H. Amelia Hargrove, free after plea and good behaviour." Poirot folded the card into his breast pocket, cancelled a lecture at the Sorbonne, and took the Fortitude 12 to Lower Wychwood. The manor had been stripped to the bones and rebuilt as a children's convalescent home. White paint, green shutters, window boxes spilling purple violas. The west gable still wore its round window, but the glass was now clear, and sunlight poured through it like warm honey. Amelia waited on the terrace in a simple blue dress, hair long again, eyes clear. Beside her stood a boy of 8, with one arm in a sling and a grin wide enough to fence the estate. "Tommy broke his wrist falling out of the apple tree," she explained. "He insisted on meeting the man who caught the jackal." Tommy thrust forward a daisy chain. "I made it myself, sir, for your moustache." Poirot accepted the crown gravely and placed it above his left ear. "Parfait. Now, I am Poirot, Roi des Fleurs." They walked him through the house. The study was now a sunlit library. Where the pedestal had stood, a circular reading rug bloomed with embroidered roses. The iron-bound door had become a Dutch door. The top half stood open to the garden. Amelia led him to the cottage. Miss Finch's parlour had been widened into a studio. Easels, paint pots, the smell of turpentine and tea. On every wall hung watercolours, jackals in moonlight, roses against frost, a small Belgian with a daisy crown. "Art therapy," she said. "The children paint their nightmares. They always choose the same 3 colours, crimson, gold, black." At sunset, they gathered beneath the eye. 20 children in wheelchairs and crutches formed a semicircle. A gardener, Colonel Graves, moustache trimmed, boots muddy, carried a wooden box. Amelia opened it. Inside lay the plaster replica, eyes painted shut with gentle white lids. She lifted it high. "Tonight we bury the guardian," she announced, "not in fear, but in flowers." The children tossed handfuls of petals. Night herald crimson, white lilac, gold marigolds, into a shallow hole beneath the round window. Tommy placed the daisy chain on top. Graves lowered the statue. Amelia scattered the last petals, then pressed the wax seal into the fresh earth. The jackal's profile faced the sky, calm, blind, harmless. Poirot spoke, voice soft enough to reach every small ear. Once upon a time, a god was angry because men stole his sleep. He wrote names in blood. Then a woman planted roses, a soldier dug a hole, and a detective brought a seal. The god looked at the roses, felt the earth, saw the seal, and decided to dream instead of count. He is dreaming now. If you hear barking in the night, it is only the wind learning to laugh. A bell rang. Supper. The children scattered, laughing. Graves lingered. "Debt paid, old friend," he said, offering a hip flask. "First press of the new orchard brandy." They drank to absent friends and present miracles. Amelia walked Poirot to the gate. She carried a tiny parcel tied with twine. "For your mantle," she said. "Open it on the train." He waited until the carriage lurched north. Inside the parcel, a single pressed night herald rose, still fragrant, and a new wax seal. This jackal wore a daisy crown and slept with one paw over its heart. On the reverse, engraved in microscopic script, "The tally is roses. The guardian is retired. Thank you for the happy ending." A.H.T. Poirot slipped the seal onto his watch chain. At dusk, the train passed the manor. Through the round window, a beam of sunset struck the buried statue and flung one last green spark across the fields. Farewell, not curse. In Farlington Mansions, he brewed verbena, opened the green notebook, and wrote a single line on the ultimate page. Case closed forever. The impossible crime was loneliness. The solution was children. He pinned the rose above the mantel, beside the sleeping plaster jackal. At midnight, every clock in London chimed in perfect unison, then fell silent. As though the city itself had learned to breathe easy. Years later, when Poirot was very old, a small boy with a broken wrist and a daisy crown would visit on spring evenings. They would drink chocolate and speak of roses that bloom in winter, of gods who prefer dreams to vengeance, and of a cottage where nightmares are painted out of existence, one crimson stroke at a time. On the night Poirot died, quietly, tisane untouched, he was found with the wax seal in his hand, and a faint smile beneath the moustache. The boy, now grown, placed a night herald rose on the coffin and whispered the words Poirot had taught him. "The tally is roses. The guardian is retired. Thank you for the happy ending." Outside, March winds scattered petals across London, and every child who found one pressed it between pages, dreaming of a jackal who learned to laugh.